Good morning, everybody. Grab your cup of Joe. Don't forget, obviously, to check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com, where you can find all of the various podcasts there. All right, so today, of course, we continue with this idea of, okay, well, how do we speak of God? According to what is the mode of predicandi, the mode of speaking of? And remember, we said the word predicated means to apply a name to speak a name upon something, or to give a name to something. And there's this idea between univocally versus equivocally. Equivocally is when you mean something different, like something sounds the same, but like equivocal usage of the word bark is sometimes you can apply it to the sound a dog makes, sometimes to that outer layer of a tree, right? So univocally, by contrast, univocally is where you mean the same thing. So if you call me a man, or Ted a man, or Snoop a man, those are all predicated, spoken of those things, right? Predicated univocally, we mean the same thing. So the title of today's chapter is that nothing is predicated univocally of God and other things. So this is kind of creating us a difficulty, right? If that phrase is true, then it kind of creates us a difficulty, because if we don't mean the same thing when we talk about things, when we say being or existence or goodness in things, and then we try to say those same names of God, that creates a difficulty, doesn't it? If we can't mean the same thing, if we use the same words but don't mean the same thing, so how do we use that? How do we? Interesting. So here we go. It is thereby evident that nothing can be predicated univocally of God and other things. An effect that does not receive a form specifically the same as that through which the agent acts cannot receive, according to a univocal predication, the name arising from that form. Thus, the heat generated by the sun and the sun itself are not called univocally hot. Now, the forms of the things God made do not measure up to a specific likeness of the divine power. For the things that God has made receive a divided For the things that God has made receive in a divided and particular way that which in him is found in a simple and universal way. Thank you for the repost, Farai. It is evident then that nothing can be said univocally of God and other things. If, furthermore, an effect should measure up to the species of its cause, it will not receive the univocal predication of the name unless it receives the same specific form according to the same mode of being. For the house that is in the art of the maker is not univocally the same house that is in matter, or for the form of the house does not have the same being in the two locations. Now, even though the rest of things were to receive a form that is absolutely the same as it is in God, yet they do not receive it according to the same mode of being. For, as it is clear from what has been said, there is nothing in God that is not the divine being itself, which is not the case with other things. Nothing, therefore, can be predicated of God and other things univocally. Moreover, whatever is predicated of many things univocally is either a genus, a species, a difference, an accident, or a property. But as we have shown, nothing is predicated of God as a genus or a difference, and thus neither is anything predicated as a definition, nor likewise as a species which is constituted of genus and difference. Nor, as we have shown, can there be any accident in God, and therefore nothing is predicated of him either as an accident or a property, since property belongs to the genus of accidents. It remains then that nothing is predicated univocally of God and other things. Again, what is predicated of many things univocally is simpler than both of them, at least in concept. Now there can be nothing simpler than God, either in reality or in concept. Nothing, therefore, is predicated univocally of God and other things. Everything, likewise, that is predicated univocally of many things belongs through participation to each of the things of which it is predicated. For the species is said to participate in the genus, and the individual in that species. But nothing is said of God by participation, since whatever is participated is determined to the mode of that which is participated, and is thus possessed in a partial way, and not according to every mode of perfection. Nothing, therefore, can be predicated univocally of God and other things. Then, too, what is predicated of some things according to priority and posteriority is certainly not predicated univocally. For prior is included in the definition of the posterior, as substance is included in the definition of accident, according as an accident has a being. If, then, being were said univocally of substance and accident, substance would have to be included in the definition of being insofar as being is predicated of substance. But this is clearly impossible. Now, nothing is predicated of God and creatures as though they were in the same order, but rather according to priority and posteriority. For all things are predicated of God essentially, for God is called being as being entity itself, and he is called good as being goodness itself. But in other things, predications are made by participation, as Socrates is said to be a man, not because he is humanity itself, but because he possesses humanity. It is impossible, therefore, that anything be predicated univocally of God and other things. So this is just an example of, again, any one of those arguments would have sufficed for understanding that you can't say that you mean something different when you're speaking of God than when you speak of things, of anything in creation. But he laid down about 5 or 6 different arguments back to back from different logical angles or different considerations in order to strengthen the argument and the understanding, and to clarify the understanding that it's true that we don't say the same things univocally of God and other things. We mean something different. Part of the reason for the multiple arguments, to consider every different angle or to bolster it with other connected concepts, part of the reason for that is because he's laying a foundation. It wouldn't be a very interesting book if all he spoke about was how we name God and name things in God. But remember, on Being in Essence, that paper written by Thomas, he said a small error in the beginning leads to great error in the end. So in order to avoid the great error in the end, very meticulously, we're laying out a very firm foundation, avoiding every nuance of error. So he's being extra careful in these chapters, especially where we talk about how we name things that pertain to God, or things and how we use names in this conversation. One of the fallacies that Aristotle discusses I believe it's in the Posterior Analytics, is where he goes, it's called the distributed middle, and it's where if you mean something slightly different by the middle term that connects the two, if you have an argument with A, B, and C, if A, then B, or A is B, B is C, therefore A is C, that middle. So sometimes equivocation can come into that middle term where you mean something slightly different, so it looks like a valid syllogism, a valid argument, but it's not. So it's things like that if we're going to have a very rigorous scientific discussion about the attributes of God, which we'll get to in very soon. There's a few more chapters about how we speak of God, which are important. But this is just laying a foundation for accuracy, which enables us to very confidently and accurately know what we're saying or claiming about God, and know what we're not saying or claiming about God, which is just as important. So, interesting stuff. But there you go. So let's see. So tomorrow, remember the contrast to univocal is equivocal. So now that we said it's not univocal, tomorrow he's going to say, well, is it just equivocal? So is there no connection between these meanings, like the word for bark, like I said earlier, bark and bark? And we're going to see tomorrow. He says, no, that's not true either. There's something there. We're talking about something, but what is it? And then day after tomorrow. So what is today? Tuesday. So Thursday, we're gonna read about how we do see things. So see, he takes the extremes away. We're not speaking univocally, and we're not speaking equivocally, but we'll speak analogically. So it's going to be by analogy that we can know things about God. And analogies are really powerful in philosophy because there can be, because the analogies have a good analogy, a proper analogy has a good ratio to it, a good reason for it, one of my favorite analogies is reasoning is to a conclusion as motion is to rest. Reasoning is to a conclusion as motion is to rest. Many reasons why I love this. In our modern era, in fact, arguably one of the worst popes of the modern epoch, who was hailed as one of the greatest popes of all time, was John Paul II. Aside from covering up all of the sex abuse crimes and the Legionnaires of Christ and everything, all the scandals that were going on, there's a lot of other doctrinal and religious practice issues that he brought up that are a big issue. That aside, for a moment, he was part of a philosophical school called phenomenology. Phenomenology is essentially somewhat like Aristotle. It considers the same thing from different perspectives. So, like if you were to look at this coffee mug from this angle, and then from this angle, and this angle, and this angle, right? So it's basically many words and many reasons, like reflections and things. And when you read, if you were to read anything that JP2 wrote, you can see this. It's just consideration after consideration after consideration, but he never actually draws any conclusions, never actually confidently states any conclusion about anything. It's just very phenomenology in its purest form. It's just very reflective. So it's just reasoning without ever coming to a rest. It's like, spinning around the same subjects without ever like confidently scientifically resting in a conclusion. So motion is to rest. So it's like driving around the block, instead of going to the grocery store and coming home, you just go and drive around the grocery store 15 times. You never got to what you were trying to do. You never made any progress. So he was very destructive, both of Catholic dogma, Catholic practice, and just the Catholic faith in general. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who debate me on that, and that's fine. We can talk about it. But anyway, so this idea of motion is to rest, so reasoning is to a conclusion as motion is to rest, is a beautiful analogy. It also moves from, like we were talking about the roads of our knowledge earlier, that which is more known to less known. So we argue from that which is more physical and material and sensible to that which is not immaterial. So we can see, feel, and imagine movement and rest. So it helps us understand a little bit more clearly the relationship between reasoning and a conclusion. There's a validity to that analogy, and there's something we can learn about reasoning and argument by considering it in the term of in the context of that analogy, right? Okay, cool. So that is an analogy by reason. So that's going to be the primary way. We'll see in a couple of days. That's going to be the primary way that we can know things about God and speak intelligently about things about God. But we have to be careful, because some analogies are not analogies by reason. They're just analogies. Or, an analogy can be true in some respect, but fail. Every analogy fails. So there's certain things that don't hold, right? About this. There are very few, if any, perfect analogies. So it's always must be considered under an aspect. This is why I've always actually wanted to learn the original ancient Hebrew, because, for example, they have things are given by analogy. That's really beautiful. Like, for example, the word for heavy in ancient Hebrew is the same word for large boulder. It's heavy too, right? And for the liver, which just so happens to be the heaviest organ in the human body. So it's interesting. There's a very intelligent and interesting analogy between those words. Hebrew is one of the smallest, one of the languages with the smallest vocabulary of all languages. And if Hebrew is the same language preserved that Adam would have spoken, and that's a big if, I know, there's some debate on that. But let's just say, if he named everything with insightful and infused perfect knowledge of the being of those things, like, remember, all creatures were brought before him and he named all of them. That's giving a name to something shows and communicates a deep knowledge of those things. I know this is a tangent, but it all has to do with naming and everything. So if he named things according to an analogy of qualities and things between them, as we see with that word for heavy in ancient Hebrew, there's something we can learn just from the words that are used, and it would really strengthen our ability to reason by analogy and to discover new truths and relationships between things based on this analogy. With the terms used in Hebrew, with the names applied to things in ancient Hebrew. So that's been a little pipe dream of mine. I know some Hebrew enough, just from my biblical studies back in the day, but I don't know enough to comfortably reason and set up analogies and examine analogies with. So that would be if I had a little pipe dream, that would be one of the things I think would be supremely useful and very, very interesting study. Okay, so let that be enough for today. But remember, tomorrow and the next day we'll look at equivocal and analogical use of words for God to kind of clarify that understanding in our own minds as to why we have to make sure that it's not purely equivocal. Is there an analogy? And that's what tomorrow's about. Okay, wonderful. So don't forget, phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Don't forget to like and share if you do appreciate these, and also check for an easier listening to the episodes in order. Check out Spotify, Cup of Jonah at Spotify, and of course at Jonah Stormrider on the live tab on YouTube. But I appreciate you joining me for Cup of Jonah this morning, and have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.